Before I start, I need 5 volunteers. It's pretty scary. You just have to come and stand up front for about 5 minutes. We have 2. If you guys could just grab a seat in the front row, I'll call on you when I need you. 3, 2 more. 4.
Serenity. Straight on my sheet.
Thank you, Mark. Alright. Tonight I am talking about a very fun topic called power and politics. Two key words that you don't hear a lot in church. But the fact is that humankind has this instinct to want power over things, whether it's power over a country, over a city, over marriage, over the music that's playing in the car. People want power. If you go look back, all the way back in the Garden of Eden, the snake tempted Eve that she would be like God and know the difference between good and evil and have that power. So tonight I'm talking about power, and there'll be politics mixed in there because often those two qualities align themselves. So, 2,000 years ago, the city of Jerusalem was a very important city. It still is today, but back then it was in a political region called Judea. And Judea was under the rule of the Roman Empire. So Caesar had ultimate control over the affairs and the events in Jerusalem. But then because of its Jewish history, in Jerusalem you had the Jewish leaders, namely the chief priests, who had some measure of control and authority over the affairs of the city of Jerusalem. So if you lived in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, there was a lot of power and power struggles. We're going to dive in, and I'm going to jot down a few points from a story that we're very familiar with that comes out of John 18. It opens when Jesus finishes praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then he's arrested by soldiers from the inside power of the day, the Jewish Sanhedrin. The chief priests of the day had their own guards in Jerusalem, and it's these guards, the Jewish Sanhedrin's guards, that come and arrest Jesus. And this is where Peter's all like, no, this is not going to happen, I'll take my sword and strike you, and cuts the guy's ear off. But Jesus, of course, takes the guy's ear and sticks it back on his head. And at that moment, the soldiers knew who had the power here, and it wasn't the soldiers, it was the guy who just healed a guy's ear. And they had no power over this man. But they still take him, I'm not going to say arrested, I'm going to say they escorted him, because they didn't really have the authority. They escorted him to Annas, if I could have volunteer number 1. Sure, that worked out. That works. Right, they took him to Annas, who wasn't the high priest, but was in fact the high priest's father-in-law, man. And Annas questions him, and after a while sends him to Caiaphas. Come send him to Caiaphas. Sends him to Caiaphas. Wow. Who is the Jewish high priest, the religious leader, and the head of the Sanhedrin. So you've got Caiaphas, who has a lot of decision-making authority over what is going to happen to Jesus. And in this corner you have Annas, who was the first stop, and he's one of the priests and has a bunch of other priests alongside him, and they all have some say in the matter. But Caiaphas obviously will have the final say, and here's Jesus caught in between this inside power. And they all question him. It specifically says in Mark 14, the chief priests and the entire supreme Jewish council of leaders. That's a lot of people. And they all try their best to bring false charges against him. They blindfold him, they beat him, and then they decide to take Jesus further up the chain of command. So they've done their best to try and get him to admit to what he's done. But they are not getting through, so they take him up the ladder. He has stood before the highest authority in their religious hierarchy, so they turn to the outside power, the Romans. So all the ruling priests, elders, religious scholars, and the entire Jewish council, that's a lot of people, drag Jesus in chains to Pilate. Volunteer number 3. No, you're facing Jesus. And Pilate says, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own laws." In other words, Pilate didn't want to get involved. Rome didn't want to get involved. The outside powers didn't want to get involved with the inside power. "But we have no right to execute anyone," said the Jews. And so Pilate went back inside and he summoned Jesus and said, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your idea?" Jesus asked, "or did the others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" And Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest," which they did, but he stops them. "My kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," Pilate said. And Jesus said, "You are right in saying, I am a king." Now at this moment, Jesus is in the middle of this inside power, but he's also in the middle of the outside power. Pilate, who is the governor of Judea, and who has rule and reign in Jerusalem, has got all kinds of power to do anything he wants to do, because he is backed by Tiberius, volunteer number 4, who is the Caesar and the emperor over Rome. And so Tiberius has given the Roman Empire power to Pilate, who now has absolute decision-making control over what happens to Jesus. And then Jesus is temporarily offloaded to volunteer number 5, Herod. You could come in this side. Who was the tetrarch of Galilee. Pilate didn't want to get involved, but the priests, the inside power, they're relentless. And so Pilate says, "Oh, Jesus is from Galilee, let's send him to Herod." Just kind of handballs him on. So Jesus gets dragged over to Herod, who says, "I don't see any reason why we should crucify him." Pilate doesn't see any reason why we should crucify him. Tiberius probably doesn't even know what's happening in this moment because he's still in Rome. But the inside power is relentless. And in a moment, Jesus Christ, God in human flesh, is in the midst of this web of power. And everyone in that moment, every single person in that moment is asking Jesus, "Are you the king?" And the Jewish people out there in the streets are crying, "I thought you were going to be a great ruler. I thought he was going to bring the kingdom of God. I thought he was the one we were waiting for, the promised one, the Messiah. But look now, it looks like he's just a pawn in the hands of power." And as the story unfolds, as Jesus does affirm, "I am a king," at the end of the day, the inside power has its way with the outside power. And Pilate finally relents. And he says to his Roman guards, "Take him away and crucify him." And carrying his own cross, he went to the place of the skull, and there they crucified him. Railroaded by inside power, now condoned and blessed by outside power, Jesus Christ breathed one last breath, and he died. From Earth's perspective, Jesus was powerless. He was surrounded by people with far greater authority than he had. In that moment, the powers of the day had complete control over his life and his death. But history tells us they did not. In Acts 2, Peter puts it fairly bluntly, as Peter does. People of Israel, listen to the facts. Jesus the Nazarene was a man on a divine mission whose authority was clearly proven. For you know how God performed many powerful miracles, signs and wonders through him. This man's destiny was prearranged, for God knew that Jesus would be handed over to you to be crucified, and that you would execute him on a cross by the hands of lawless men. Yet this was all part of his predetermined plan. God changes time and season. He removes kings and sets up kings. God was not the pawn, God was the king in this picture. Thank you, volunteers. The next example. Moving back 600 years, there was a different power ruling the earth. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon, and he built a statue of himself and commanded that all his officials bow down and worship it. You know the story. The people of Judah were captives of the Babylonians, and 3 of them refused to bow. Picking up the story in Daniel 3. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and a bumblebee be brought. Sorry, it's my vegetables kicking in. They brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image of myself that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sounds of the hornpipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands?" From Earth's perspective, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were powerless. They were surrounded by people with far greater authority than they had. In that moment, the power of the day had complete control over their lives or their death. But history tells us it did not. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this manner. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up." We know how this story turns out. Nebuchadnezzar put 3 people into the furnace. There were 4 people walking around. Nebuchadnezzar thought that one was an angel. Most people say that it was probably Jesus himself in the fire, doing what he always does, delivering us out of the furnace before he gets us, delivering us in the furnace before he gets us out of the furnace, showing his superior strength in our lives, in the difficulty, before he gets us out of the difficulty. One